and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Marc Caruso, the CEO and co-founder of Angry Mob Music. So, Marc, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. How's it going?
It's going great, Rachel. Thanks for having me. Happy to be
Very
here.
excited to hear your answers to these questions. Are you ready for your first one?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Let's do it. Imagine for a second you are sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note, and what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Well, we have the benefit of hindsight now that I'm my age, which I won't say, but to my 25-year-old self. From the personal side, I would say that when opportunities present themselves, start at yes, and then figure out if you need to change to no. When I was younger, I didn't realize how often fear was shaping my decisions. I would start at no and then try to rationalize my way to yes. But that kind of decision making was driven by hesitation, fear, and it kept me from experiencing a lot of growth that could have come sooner. And I think I told myself I was being cautious or practical, but really I was just playing it safe, staying inside my bubble. And then once I started approaching from a place of being open, starting at yes, that's when I began to grow much more quickly. I took many more measured risks and discovered new things that maybe I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So saying yes doesn't mean being reckless and just without abandon, but it just means trusting that you'll figure out that once things are going, it's going to work out. And so that shift was kind of one of the biggest changes in my own personal life, which I wish I knew it at 25 versus learning it later down the road. Professionally, I would I would tell my younger self to network relentlessly. And when I was starting out in the business, networking felt really scary. I would look around a room and I would see people who seemed like they all knew everyone, like they were part of the cool kids club that I wasn't a part of. And for a while, that kept me pretty quiet and reserved in the industry and at events. But what I learned is that this business is built on relationships. It's not just about what you know or even who you know, but it's more about like who knows you and who can
Mhm.
vouch for you. So once I overcame that fear of introducing myself and inserting myself into conversations, whether at an event or even over email, things started to really change dramatically. Opportunities started to appear, not because I asked for them, but because people knew of me. They remembered
Mhm.
me in situations. And then with building that network, I learned that these relationships aren't transactional. They're some of the most impactful relationships that I've had started with no agenda. It was just being curious about somebody, a shared interest, or just like a good vibe. And if I could go back, I would tell myself, realize that everyone in that room once started with the same feeling that you're having right now or in that moment. So start the conversations, be generous with yourself, be generous with your time, be real, be authentic. That's what builds a healthy network, and that's what builds a career in this industry. So those are the two things I would tell myself
That was
in two
very,
different
very
ways.
great advice. And I feel like for some reason, not something that people really think about too much, that you're so right. Like everybody started somewhere. Touching back to your first point really quickly. So, Angry Mob has obviously grown significantly since you founded it. So, looking back, what were some of kind of the most pivotal decisions or moments that helped scale the company over time? Was it saying yes to everything?
Well, again, not you don't want to be reckless with the yes.
Hmm.
What scaled it over time, or like what we learned along the way was about the value of people. And I think when we started the company, which we started very sync heavy, and we still are, but it was about the music. And sometimes companies focus too much on the music and not the people that are behind the music. And once we really started to invest in the person, in the artist, in the songwriter, as a human being, that's where things really started to grow because the relationships were much more tighter than a relationship to just a song. So that Yeah, I mean, it seems very esoteric in terms of the idea, but having that approach, then, almost like what I said earlier about network building, it's not transactional anymore. It's about the people. And then your songwriters, for us as a publisher, become ambassadors for the company and spread the word. And so that really was the biggest learning lesson that we changed along the way to really grow.
Very interesting. Okay, moving on. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that can't always be the case. Sometimes they can be quite good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
It's funny because I was thinking about this, and the answer that I'm going to say, I say to a lot of people that are starting out in the industry. So it feels like it's a secret because it's something that you don't learn until you actually enter the industry and work within it. And so that's this, that the music industry and publishing especially is way smaller than it seems from the outside. When you're just starting out, the industry feels huge, it feels impenetrable, and in a lot of ways it is, right? But very quickly you realize that everyone in the industry is connected by maybe 1 or 2 degrees at most. It's a community where your name and your reputation, for better or for worse, travels fast. People talk, people remember how you made them feel, so that reputation is your calling card. And so if you're a songwriter, we're in the publishing industry, if you're a songwriter, you protect it by being the person that they want in that writing room. And that means being prepared, being on time, not flaking, not dominating the room, to listen as much as you speak, right? So in one bad session can ripple out in ways that you may not see because of that 1 or 2 degrees separation from everybody. For executives in the industry, it's kind of the same. It's about how you treat your songwriters, your team, your peers, your colleagues, how you follow through on what you say. You never know who's watching, who's listening, and more importantly, you never know who's connected to who, right? And this is a business where your reputation gets around faster than you do, and that can work for you. You hope it does, or it can work against you. You hope it does not, or you don't want to be the person who's worried if it's working against you. So you try to choose the former there. So that's the secret. That from a people standpoint, it's a much smaller industry than it may seem.
Very true, very
Is that way
true.
to you? I mean,
Everybody, yeah, no,
right?
everybody is connected. I feel like even if you don't see it on social media, you're just having coffee with someone and all of a sudden they mention somebody that you met 3 years ago. It's the craziest thing.
Completely, 100%.
Before we come up to the last question, so you've been active on multiple industry boards and councils. I'm curious to know how has that shaped your perspective on where music publishing is heading, especially for independent companies?
I was, I was on the board of the AIMP. I was
Hmm.
actually chapter president of the LA chapter, and then that what it taught me was that we have a shared experience within the industry. So that this idea that it's just my company that's having, these challenges or this fight in the industry. No, it was really learning that the the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Except in this case, we're not enemies. It's especially in the publishing side where we are competitors as publishers, but we are colleagues because we work together on joint ownership of songs, right? So we're used to, working with one shared purpose. And being on a board or an industry organization, you learn about these challenges and you learn that we're all in it together. And as indies, it's even more so because we do have to bond together to have a louder voice just because of the nature of being independent. So that was the big kind of learning point there. And then being involved with the larger trade organizations, the NMPA and so forth, you realize that it's not so much of these fights aren't just about indies either,
Hmm.
right? That we are all in it together. And so, yeah, that sounds very kumbaya, but that idea that we fight this fight together and that's how we do it and that's the right way to do it, that's the biggest takeaway that I had from my time serving in these different
Awesome.
organizations.
Makes total sense. Okay, we have arrived at the last question. Throughout your career, I'm sure you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
Okay, the question I've never been asked is, and it's funny because it seems like it's going to seem like a very common question that would be asked, but never has. I've never been asked what's the hardest part of my job that nobody will talk about.
Wow, I'm surprised you haven't been asked
I
that.
haven't been asked that, right? I mean, maybe it's kind of the nature of the conversations that I've had or the panels or so forth, that it's mostly about industry topics and whatnot, as opposed to the personal
hmm
experience. But I had never been asked that. And so my answer to what's the hardest part of my job, um, I think everybody assumes that the hardest part is just being in the industry, running the business, pitching songs, negotiating deals, trying to get placements, and all that is hard, absolutely. But the part that keeps me up at night is to balance belief and reality. So what does that mean? It means that as a publisher, we have to believe in our songwriters, and sometimes even more than they believe in themselves, right? But so we have to believe in their songs, their potential, their career paths. But belief alone doesn't always mean wins and success. Sometimes even when a song is absolutely amazing and a writer is really cooking at this point, the timing isn't right, or the opportunity just does not land, and it can be for a whole bunch of reasons that are beyond our control. And so that's when we have to deliver the hard news. And we have to explain to someone, and not just anyone, but a songwriter who's poured their heart and their story and their soul into their music. We have to tell them it didn't land. It did not get picked. And we can't let that shake their confidence in what they're doing, or ours for that matter. That's the tightrope. And so we have to stay optimistic, but honest at the same time. And what I've learned from our songwriters in these situations is how vulnerable they are. And they carry that into each writing session. Every song is a little piece of who they are. It's their story. It's a piece of their soul. And it's made me rethink how we give feedback and how we protect their creative space, for lack of a better term. At the end of the day, we're not just managing songs, we're managing their trust, the trust that we're doing our job, but trust in themselves that did they make the right decision to be in this industry. And so the hardest part is holding someone's creative heart in your hands in some ways, and all the while still needing to be honest with them about the business. And so that balancing act, 100% is the hardest part of my job.
Would you say that a hard part about your job that kind of leaps into that would also be almost training the people that work for you on how to approach those conversations as well?
Completely. Yeah, we have a core value. One of our core values at the company is about writer centric. Everything we do is in service to the writer. Yes, we have a catalog of music, of songs, but ultimately we're in the service business. And our job is to serve the songwriter. So if we keep that core value, then how we give that feedback is always framed in the light of, well, what's in the best interest of the songwriter? We have to be honest, we have to be absolutely, but we have to support them. And that human aspect is so important, especially as a publisher, because we're there when those songs are born into the world, right? So we're with them so early in that creative process. So if we shake their confidence, it's going to affect what they're doing in that writing room and how they're going to tell their story or how they're going to collaborate. And so, yeah, I mean, team training on that is absolutely critical. Everybody has to be on the same page.
Well, we have reached the end of the interview, but Mark, thanks again for being on. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Rachel, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.